25 years of amazing service to Nigeria. Our time's already fast spent without much ado. I'll just implore us to please settle down so that we can kick off. In the last 25 years, the NESG has continued to help Nigeria and the Nigerian economy with the Nigerian Economic Summit. What has been the impact of this summit in the last 25 years? Let me welcome here Mr. Lanre Akibo, presenting the impact assessment of this summit in the last 25 years. Lanre.
Good morning, Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. My name is Lanre Akibo. I'm with the Central Organizing Committee of Nigeria Economic Summit 25. As an important milestone in the public-private dialogue platform that the Nigerian Economic Summit provides, NESG 25 provides us an opportunity for impact assessment. In other words, has it been worthwhile? Are there specific indicators of traction? Or maybe in language that some of us have been persecuted with? And I don't dey go Abuja again, Abi. And I know they tire to talk. I'll provide a bit of context. The Nigerian Economic Summit is a child of necessity. Picture the macroeconomic and political environment in Nigeria of 1993. We had a fragile political situation. There was continued decline in the macroeconomic environment. Leaders who were distressed by the state of the nation and decided to they were committed to opening up the economy. This group of visionary leaders created a non-partisan, non-profit, non-political platform for public-private dialogue on the future of the Nigerian economy. NESG has since remained the most formidable The Nigerian Economic Summit has since been in the vanguard of promoting an open, globally competitive economy by providing a platform for dialogue. This platform helps to shape policy through public-private dialogue. The Nigerian Economic Summit provides a platform for accountability by tracking performance of policies and development agendas through regular scorecards and benchmarking analysis. The Nigerian Economic Summit provides a platform for advocacy by helping shape policy through input of summit recommendations into Executive Council memos. This summit process has successfully advocated for several reforms and policy changes in the last 25 years. And for this, we can be very proud. Rather than delve into specific initiatives in each year, I have broken down the last 25 years into three epochs. These are specific time intervals with unique narratives for our dear country. These epochs, or eras, as I will now refer to 1993 to 1999. I call this the infancy era. This era marked the dying days of military rule and the dawn of our current democracy. There was decline in the macroeconomic environment. We were globally isolated. We had weak democratic institutions. Average GDP growth rate during this era was about 0.9. The second era was from year 2000 to year 2010. I call this the opening up era. During this era, we saw early signs of ambition for global relevance through bold reforms to open up the economy. There was the global financial crisis towards the end of the era. Market average growth era was 7.2. The third era was from year 2011 to 2018. I call this the waiting to launch era. This was a period that saw two additional democratic transitions, which further consolidated transition to democratic rule that started in 1999. There was economic slowdown due to restiveness in some parts of the country, terrorism, and an economic recession. This era was, however, plagued by policy inconsistencies and an inability to capitalize on our collective gains since the return to democracy. Average GDP growth rate during this era was about 3.1%. Although I would add a slight proviso that the GDP was rebased, at some point in this era, so the numbers might not be entirely comparable across the three eras. But the point is that we could not take advantage of the collective gains we had made. Fortunately, these three eras firmly overlap different federal administrations, so we cannot be accused of political bias. During the infancy era, the Nigerian Economic Summit recommendations and interventions included a framework for developing a long-term vision for Nigeria, which laid the foundations for Vision 2010. We made proposals on reductions of cost of doing business in order to encourage the private sector as the engine of growth. There was evidence-based policy analysis into national policy and development plans. The Economic Summit provided to the government at the time an economic action agenda, which was basically a summary of key recommendations of the Nigerian Economic Summit from 1993 to 1999. During this era, we concluded by saying that the Nigerian Economic Summit helped expand the civic engagement space and laid a strong foundation for a national public-private dialogue process. The Nigerian Economic Summit laid the foundation for legislative and regulatory changes for deregulation and democracy. During the opening up era, the NES recommendations and interventions were as follows. Allow the private sector to be the engine of economic growth, while the public sector acts as an enabler. Maximize oil wealth and use it to develop the non-oil economy. Focus on 5 growth drivers of the future: job creation, security, social and physical infrastructure, reforms and privatization, and reform of the investment climate. Requested presidential assent to the electric power sector reform bill and target generation of 10,000 megawatts of electricity. Summit recommended full implementation of price deregulation and transparency in the downstream oil and gas sector. During this era, the Nigerian Economic Summit provided a platform to advocate for sector-specific reforms such as pension, energy, ICT, infrastructure, etc. The Nigerian Economic Summit provided advocacy for the creation and strengthening of key reform institutions, including the BPE, the NIPC, the Due Process Office, the Bureau of Public Procurement, etc. These efforts opened up the economy and led to significant growth. As I mentioned earlier, average GDP growth rate was 7.8% during this era. Waiting to launch era. NESG recommendations were as follows. We highlighted factor conditions for investment, including financial services, transportation, infrastructure, education, etc. Provided a platform for advocacy for implementation imperatives of our stated long-term development agenda, which was Vision 2020 at the time. Provided policy recommendations on sustainable peace and security in the Niger Delta, which were key elements of the Niger Delta Master Plan and the Amnesty Program. We also advocated for reductions in the cost of doing business. We also see a combination of various economic summit recommendations in sector-specific reforms, notably in the finance sector. In the early years, the Nigerian Economic Summit made recommendations for structural reforms required for banking in post-democratic Nigeria. We are witnesses today to the sheer size and sophistication of our financial system. The pension industry now has in excess of 9 trillion naira in assets under management. Yet another impact of the reform agenda canvassed on the platform of the Nigerian Economic Summit. Of course, we know of the telecom revolution that began in 2001 following the deregulation of the sector. There are also successful reforms in ports, aviation, rail, the maritime sector, etc. I will acknowledge, however, that the power sector reform remains an ongoing challenge. But we will not stop advocating for a more comprehensive solution. I summarized the robust Nigeria Economic Summit policy recommendations that were preferred at this same venue over these many years. In fact, this venue has become our hallowed grounds in a sense, as we have held the summit at this same venue all these years to reflect the most common themes during each era. I assure you that this was by no means an attempt to minimize the quality of recommendations. Indeed, it was a very tasking activity, given the sheer volume of material involved. Now, given the impacts and successes we lay claim to, some may wonder, did all these impacts happen because of the summit? Or could they have happened in spite of the summit? After all, they will argue, every government of the day had its own agenda and would have made progress in some areas regardless. Well, that may be true in some sense, but it's not the full story. We do know that the summit has never failed in bringing to the front burner of national discourse every year burning national issues with a view to engaging politicians, business leaders, all arms of government, the international community, and other stakeholders to prefer solutions. What we have seen is that the more we have harped on issues, the higher the chances of getting them solved. The other point to note is that the summit process helps to shape the philosophies and ideologies of citizens, many of whom have had opportunities to serve in various public capacities. So in that sense also, we can lay claim to some indirect impact. Perhaps the most important impact are the policy commissions. These are working groups comprising of public and private sector executives that meet regularly to fast-track the adoption of Nigerian Economic Summit recommendations and ensure their implementation. There are currently 11 policy commissions focused on a diverse range of issues, ranging from energy and infrastructure to finance and tourism. Several members of the policy commissions are past delegates of the Nigerian Economic Summit. Please see pages 12 and 13 of your information brochure for details about membership of policy commissions. The summit process has also produced several strong partnerships, notably NASBA, the National Assembly Business Environment Roundtable. This is an engagement platform for the legislature and the private sector. NASBA is a partnership between the NESG, the UK Department for International Development, and the Nigerian Bar Association section on business law. Through this partnership, 11 bills were passed by the 8th National Assembly, including the Petroleum Industry Governance Bill, the Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Bill, and the Federal Roads Authority Bill. Are there areas in our dialogue partnership showcase some improvements? Definitely, and we will continue to solicit feedback from fellow summit delegates in the work of nation building. What is clear, however, is that continuous advocacy, dialogue, and genuine engagements do work. We must stay the course in the journey towards an open, globally competitive Nigerian economy. And the Nigerian Economic Summit is the most formidable dialogue platform to help achieve our objective. I trust that we will all renew our commitments to this painstaking process. So, particularly for those of you that are veterans of this process, the next time someone asks you, you don't go Abuja again, Abi? What do they do for that economic summit itself? Please tell them, yes, so I don't go. Now there all the people who fit solve Niger problem full. Make I go talk my own join. And as you do that, ask them, you uncle, what do they do about this country matter self? Thank you for listening. May God bless our beloved Nigeria.
And this, my brother, doing well. Let's put our hands together for him, ladies and gentlemen. Your Excellency, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, before we bring our very digital panel, and I can see them to my right, onto here. None of them is up to 35, but they look forward to 31 years from now, what will become of our country. And therefore, on their shoulders, probably amongst them, we have the president of the country 31 years from now. We don't know. But here they are seated. But before then, let me quickly bring you a 5-minute clip from a woman that's had an amazing relationship with the Nigerian Economic Summit, whether as the SSA to the president on MDG, or as Minister of Environment, and now currently, she is the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations. Hajia Amina Mohammed has a few words to delegates, and after that, our panel will commence. Let's have the tape.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues, I apologize that I cannot be there with you in person. Last-minute events at the UN headquarters have come in the way, but I am very much with you in spirit, and I thank you for this opportunity. Let me begin by commending the organizers for putting together such a stimulating summit, starting with the very title itself, Nigeria 2050, Shifting Gears. You hit the nail on the head. Because shifting gears does not mean simply moving from one speed to the next. Shifting gears has to be about a transformation in the way in which societies are governed, business is conducted, and social and economic obstacles are overcome. You've already had a full day of enriching discussions about so much of that. For my part, let me just say from the outset, it is very easy to be cynical in our world today. And it is true, things are a long way from being perfect. When one looks around the world, around any continent, around any country, we know there is good, there is not so good, and there is the ugly. Many things are wrong, and they do need fixing. No country anywhere in the world can shift gears without confronting core issues head-on. Sustainability and governance, inequality and social cohesion, infrastructure and social services. No country anywhere in the world can get to the next level when people are busy avoiding taxes, pilfering the public purse, and exploiting religion or ethnicity to divide and conquer. Here in Nigeria not long ago, the economy was at risk of teetering down a black hole. Nigeria is back, the #1 growth story on the African continent. GDP growth this year is up, but slowing as it is around the world. More and more we see that growth driven by the non-oil sector. Diversification is the name of the game. Non-oil exports almost doubled from 2016 to 2018. The headwinds to growth are familiar to all: high unemployment and rising public debt, with all the attendant linkages between unemployment and insecurity that we all know so well. People need jobs and hope, especially women and young people, and particularly in a context where we know that in a little more than a generation, the Nigerian population will double. Growth needs to translate into people's lives, and current indices show that many millions of Nigerians still living below the poverty line. Many not in school, and even when they are, they may not finish or graduate with the right skills. Many are not getting the right to basic services guaranteed under our constitution in Nigeria. At the same time, I never cease to be amazed by the enormous resilience of the Nigerian people despite it all. Most are hardworking in the informal sector without the support, the oversight, the safety nets for such people to reach their full potential. So the key challenges before Nigeria are ones that many countries face today. How to harvest the economic gains for all, how to build a sustainable, inclusive economy, how to make connections with the rest of the world. Let me begin by zooming out a bit with that global picture. I'm here on the heels of the annual opening of the General Assembly in New York, so ably led, I might add, by the President of the General Assembly, Professor Tijani Muhammad Bandi. It's a whirlwind of a meeting after meeting with world leaders. Some call it the diplomatic equivalent of speed dating. But if you listen closely, it also offers the latest soundtrack of our times. The sounds we heard this year are of unease, uncertainty, and anxiety. Secretary General Antonio Guterres summed it up perfectly. He said, "We are living in a world of disquiet." He underscored that our fractured world needs international cooperation more than ever. But simply saying it will not make it happen. As we Nigerians know, fine words do not produce food. We need to mobilize solutions that respond to people's anxieties with answers. That is why action and ambition were the focus of this year's General Assembly. We put climate action front and center. We launched a decade of action to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals. We put on the table the need for a new model for our world, a fair globalization, rooted in justice and dignity and equality. And all of this has profound regional, national, and local implications. So let me drill down from the global to the continental. The African Union is grounded in the understanding that peace and development go hand in hand. As His Excellency President Muhammadu Buhari said at the General Assembly, no threat is more potent than poverty and exclusion. I see African leaders taking the lead to resolve African crises and building stronger architecture within the African Union to support these efforts, including through preventive diplomacy. That is why the Silencing the Guns initiative is so critical. Perhaps no challenge better demonstrates the need for cross-border, cross-cutting solutions than what we see playing out in our own neighborhood. I'm talking about the Lake Chad Basin as well as the Sahel, where we see poverty, governance loopholes, and impunity fueling the rise in violent extremism. Add to that toxic brew climate change, with the scarcity of natural resources exacerbating tensions. We see Nigeria's economy bumping up against challenges such as these. The Sahel region is the home of tremendous potential, but it requires a multilateral approach. And of course, the African Continental Free Trade Area is another important avenue for potential, with all the benefits that a larger regional market brings, along with serving as a learning platform for investment cooperation in building productive capacity and deepening regional value chains. It also offers the possibilities of sowing the seeds of an African commodities exchange. The key is leveraging all of that for good of all. As the largest economy in Africa, such as a central player, I see Nigeria's leadership as pivotal going forward. This places on your shoulders a heavy responsibility on confronting issues across the board. So
thank you. She will hear in New York. Your round of applause will get there. Thank you. Thank you very much. And so Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Today is day 2 of our summit, and in the last one day or thereabout, as we look forward 31 years from now, the conversation is around industrial revolution, making Nigeria globally competitive, transforming our educational sector, managing our demographics, and achieving sustainable peace. When we look towards 31 years from now, the people who will manage the emerging leaders are already here. On your behalf, join me as I welcome our panel. Our moderator is Ms. Nicole Ndigwe, founder, MACME Project. Let me welcome the 32-year-old speaker of the Oyo State House of Assembly, Right Honorable Adebo Ogundoyin. And also here is Honorable Mrs. Hannatu Mohammed, board member, ICPC. She's even less than 30. I welcome you. The CEO of God is Good Group, at 32, has turned around a family business into a global enterprise. Please welcome Chidi Ajere. And then Mr. Samson Itodo, Executive Director, Yega, Africa. You see, the young ones, when they approach the stage, they run. Over to you.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good morning. You're welcome to the plenary 3 session at NES 25. My name is Nicole Ndigwe. I am the moderator. I'd like to thank my panelists for making our time to be here today. And this morning, we will be discussing leadership in 2050, insights from Nigeria's emerging leaders. And first of all, we just have 50 minutes for this session. So I take it that I have your permission to interject when I think it's absolutely necessary. Do I? Yes, thank you. Okay, so this morning, our conversation is very important because we all know what Nigeria is about to face. Between now and 2050, Nigeria will undergo transformational change, one that will require a new approach to leadership. Leadership that not only addresses and responds to the changing dynamics in our, in our society, but one that has young people at the forefront of engagement and service, understanding that what happens within this generation and the next will have a decisive impact on the results that we see in 2050. That said, I'll dive right into my first question, and this question actually came to mind when I was doing my research on the NESG, who was supposed to be our special guests on this panel. During a speech that was delivered by Madam DSG, at I think it was the Mo Ibrahim Foundation event in Marrakesh, she identified some factors that I believe are critical to the growth and development of any nation. And some of those themes were accountability, trust, conviction, courage, and my personal favorite, engagement with all at all times. My question then will be, faced with a youth demography that, that feel left out, discouraged, and even frustrated, how do we re-energize our young people to rise up to the challenge of leadership? Starting with you, Mr. Sampson.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and good morning, everybody. How do we get young people re-energized? I am part of a campaign called the Not Too Young to Run campaign that led to the amendment of our constitution to reduce the age for running for office. And I'm proud, I'm pleased to say that at such a time in our history, young people rose up to demand space in the political process, not because they wanted to be part of the process, but because they wanted to contribute their own quota to national development. And across Nigeria today, we've got young people who are less than 30 who are in assemblies, as well as in the House of Reps. First, we need to fix politics. And when I say fix politics, it's simply we've got to make politics or democracy deliver development to the people. And the kind of leaders that we need in public office are leaders who have competence, who have capacity, and who have the character to provide the excellent public leadership that Nigeria needs. And I think that's a burden that this was 35.6%. For governorship elections, it was 32%. And that is so low and very, very poor. But what does that tell you? That you're getting a lot of young people who are not participating in the political process because, one, they probably don't believe that their votes count, and it is very, very complex to vote, to become a voter in Nigeria. And so it's important that we take the Big Brother Nigeria model and look at what is that actually telling us. It's telling us that we need to change the way we vote in our elections. We need to improve the level of trust because there is broken trust in the public space. And the third is our political parties. I think we've got very weak parties today who don't conduct primary elections that yield excellent leaders. Our primary elections today are either an auction for the highest bidder or they are signposted by violence and all forms of irregularity. We need to address that. Our political parties need to ensure that the candidates that they field for elections are candidates that understand what it takes to provide leadership. We're not there yet, but over the next 30 years, I tell you, there's a generation of young politicians that are rising that will disrupt this space because our political system needs a shock, and we're going to provide our shock.
So I hear participation and engagement. Mr. Chidi.
Thank you very much. Good to be here this morning. And I'm very hopeful that many of the things we're going to talk about today and that we've talked about yesterday would actually be considered by, the leadership of the country and the government. I believe very strongly that in Nigeria today there are so many young individuals who can actually deliver, but they need to be given the right opportunities. And I personally think that the society, the country, the leadership basically needs to provide the enabling environment for youths to thrive. Many of the youths today do not have the capacity or the muscle, financial strength to be able to hold on to leadership position. So I take myself as an example. At the age of 21, when the leadership of the founder of our company left us, it was difficult to basically see how a young individual would take a small company and turn it into a global company. But in the last 10 years, we took a company that was less than 200 employees, and today we're employing over 4,000 people, and we're in over 4 countries. Yeah, thank you very much. And we're in over 4 countries today, and and we're still growing. That was because I had the opportunity. First off, I had the education. I've always believed that the salvation of Nigeria and the salvation of Africa is hinged on 4 basic elements, and that will be leadership, education, technology, and security. So first, we need the right leadership that understands the importance of education and educating the teeming population, the the growing youth population of Nigeria. Leadership that also understands the importance of technology in the advancement of our nation, and also understands the importance of security in nation building. But more importantly to your question, Nicole, is leadership that then provides opportunity for young people like ourselves here who are seated down here to basically thrive in leadership positions, especially political leadership positions, where we're able to create policies that are geared towards enabling a society like Nigeria to thrive in the future. So basically, leadership that creates the right opportunity.
Okay, so I hear opportunity and education. Hanati.
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. I would like to agree with my co-panelists on education. I feel it's the basic bedrock for foundation. But more to education, I feel we all need a reorientation, sort of, because to have leaders, we have leaders according to the people that we are. If we're still picking from amongst ourselves, we're still having the same mindset. So I feel a social reorientation is very key. With the education, both formal and informal education, they're very key. And also, we need to be more active, both politically and in the private sector. We really can't depend on the government entirely for everything. We have to venture out to the private sector and actually do things for our country. And there's so many opportunities because there's so many untapped areas that we have in the nation that we could venture into through the private sector. And also the public sector should, in the public sector, there's things that the government can improve on to help the youth with policies and the private sector as well, so that we can all move forward. And by 2050, the emerging leaders would have a new set of skills that, I'm sorry to say, maybe may not be present at the moment, but then we would have nurtured a whole generation towards that, and having visions that we don't want to see at the moment, but we want our future generation to see them. Long-term visions and leadership sustainability plans. Thank you.
Thank you. You said reorientation, policies, and mentorship. Mr. Adebo.
Yeah, good morning. My name is Right Honorable Adebo Godoyin, also the Speaker of Oyo State House of Assembly. And the conversation this morning is actually apt, considering where we are. But what I believe is the youth should be given more opportunity, either in public sector or in private sector. I became the speaker by the work that the party and also, I became the speaker by the good work of the party and the people around me.
We'll let him catch his breath. Okay? Do you need to catch your breath?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll go back to you, Samson. Samson, yes. Now, Samson, you went to a federal university. And I did also. I mean, I spent 4 years in a school where I was being trained to understand my past when my counterparts were preparing to take over the future. For 4 years, I was trained to do photojournalism with a camera from 1970. I was taught to draft a newspaper on pen and paper, a dummy, when that is not obtainable in present day. So I finished school, and then I end up playing catch-up for 4 to 6 years when around the world, my counterparts are breaking status quo and scaling. My question then is, with the way our education and everything is set up in our country, do you believe that we are producing the right crop of young people that will deliver on the goals that we have for 2050?
Quite frankly, excuse me? Okay. I think that's a very important question in view of the introductory remarks that we've had from colleagues about the importance of education. And I would say, with all sense of responsibility, that we've got an educational system that is producing not only misfits for the future, but it's threatening our existence as a people. And 3 points I'd like to make with respect to this question. First is about the philosophy that underpins our education system. And quite frankly, forgive me, I don't know what's the philosophy that underpins our education system. And that needs to be clear. Even though you've got our Constitution under Chapter 2 that talks about fundamental objectives and the directive principles of state policy and the role, as well as you look at the exclusive legislative list and concurrent legislative list, I still don't find what's that philosophy. And we need to learn from other nations and their philosophy of leadership. And flowing from that is the investment in education. We're not investing enough in education. You go to our public schools. I am proud that I went to University of Jos. I'm a Josite for life. I couldn't have gone to any other university. But go back to those schools today. You find out the infrastructural deficit, even the capacities of our lecturers and the opportunities available for them to invest in research and build the capacities of or teach students. Or you look at the fact that we're grappling with this high number of kids who are out of school. And it's very, very important that our political leadership needs to invest in education. If you look at our policy, we need to, I know there's so much emphasis on, excuse me, on informal education, but that also needs some prioritization. I know at different levels across the country, different state governments are prioritizing vocational skills and infusing that into our education system. That's very, very important. But we need to accelerate that. And the last point I will make is this emphasis or this fragmentation between whether some courses are professional courses and others are non-professional courses. I think that the government and the state needs a deliberate effort towards ensuring that all courses are important, invest in all courses, and we need to encourage young people and our kids to look at other vocations, photography, journalism, and not just law or medicine, that we prime them as the most important vocations in Nigeria.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Adebo, I'll come back to you now. Okay, so my question now will be, based on the fact that you're a young legislator, I mean, you've experienced challenges so much that I'm sure you can write a book on it. So my question to you will be, how can young people who want to or are preparing or aspire to lead be better prepared for the challenges ahead?
Well, to start off with, I hope I'm more prepared this time around to speak rather than,
we hope so.
than the last time. I mean, like, looking from outside, leadership roles seem easier than it really is. The same way I actually thought earlier that being a part of something so grand, also like what the Nigerian Economic Summit Group is also the platform that we are on now, is actually bigger than what we actually see it in terms of their input and their contribution to the advancement of the country. But to be honest, all in all, the youth will have a lot of role to play, and 2050, as the theme is, really concerns the youth, because, sorry to say, most of us are still going to be here, and at the time, and in future as well, 2050, like 35% of the whole, 65% of the whole population will be under 35. And of course, this poses a lot of threats to we sitting down here, and even the other youth also that are doing their things both in the local, state, and the federal level. We're going to be put on the map, and we're going to be the targets for the future youth. if the present leaders do not put things right. So this is kind of like an appeal to the present leaders also to put things right in such a way to make an environment more enabling for us, to make a strong private sector, and also put youth more, make youth more involved in public sectors as well, be it politics or wherever.
So I take it that you're saying starting them early.
Yeah, most definitely.
Will have
like
them better prepared.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's no way you can be prepared for any position that you're in. Me, for one, I got into politics at the age of 31, and at 32, I became the speaker. I mean, nothing could have prepared me also to be in this gathering. A year ago, I wasn't thinking about this. A year ago, I was actually on my farm. I was fortunate enough to get a credit facility from Bank of Agriculture, but I'm sure it's not everybody that has the opportunity. But the opportunity given to me to establish my farm, today the farm employs about roughly 70 people, and we also do processing of salad vegetables on the farm. And what we decided to do was target high-valued crops. That was a niche that was missing, because what we realized was that we import most of the salad vegetables that we consume in Nigeria. So we, rather than importing it, we decided to actually start growing them here. Vegetables like kale, lettuce, Swiss chard, and them lot. So I believe that the youth are innovative and are ready to work, but only if we're given the right opportunity to actually do this work. Opportunities, be it credit facilities, with low credit facilities, of course, like they want to give the agriculture about 5%. But if you are talking about credit facilities like the banks actually give, it's too high and it's cutthroat, and not a lot of businesses can thrive using that model. So all in all, there's no way youth can be prepared unless given the opportunity. Then being there, they'll be in a better position to adapt. Thank you.
Chidi, so you have private sector experience. So in the same way, how do you think young people can be better prepared to take up leadership?
Honestly, I think there are so many youths today who are already prepared for leadership. I mean, if you are a leader and you do not know what artificial intelligence is today, you have no reason leading a state or a nation. If you do not understand the concept of blockchain, if you do not understand the concept of data analytics and how important it is to institution building, you have no business leading any institution or anything or whatsoever. Yeah. I mean, and that's the truth. If we're talking about, you know, shifting gears and leading in 2050, we need to know, I mean, we can't be talking about insufficient electricity in a country like Nigeria today when the world is talking about artificial intelligence and self-driving cars, when they are talking about how to use technology to basically advance their nation. So basically, Nicole, to your point, I think that, beyond providing the opportunity, the youth also need to show that they are capable of leading and taking advantage of opportunities that will be presented to them. The youth basically need to think more long-term and be more long-term oriented. They need to first think value before money. So what I realize, even in the private sector, so there's all this talk about education or whatever. Yeah, I mean, these are a big deal. But the youths in themselves, we also need to be sure that we are value creators and we're not just thinking short-term and just thinking about, like, immediate gratification, how much money we can make today and things like that. Our focus should be, he talked about Big Brother and all the votes and all of that stuff that went into Big Brother and all this hype about social media. I think that the youth need to refocus on, you know, the important part of, like, nation building. How do we influence policies?
Yeah, but then if you would say one thing that actually prepared you for such a huge role at such a young age, what would that be?
I would say it starts with education. So my people perish for the lack of knowledge, and knowledge is the principal thing, right? So how do we ensure that enough people know? because once they know and they are presented with the opportunities, they can lead better.
I agree. Yeah. Okay. And to the lady on the panel. So you work in the public sector, and would agree that leadership in the public sector differs, essentially from what we have in the private sector. Private sector is characterized by speed and spontaneity in decision making, but that's not exactly the case in public service. So my question is, what do you think we could do, considering that the aspirations and the goals in the public sector are the same with what we want to achieve in the private sector? What can we do to improve the speed and quality of decision making in the public sector to ensure that we shift these gears, understanding the fact that we need institutions that work to have any chance at a success?
Thank you, Nicole. I would like to start by making the comment that leadership is a sacrifice. It's not a position of power or advantage or any other thing. It's actually a huge sacrifice, and to be in that position, you have to be willing to make that sacrifice. And we have to leave the idea of being constricted by the bureaucratic bottleneck that surrounds all the processes that happen in the public sector, which means we have to plan ahead. We have to have better plans so that whatever challenges we meet, we have enough time to actually go around them. We have such things as the empowerment processes that are going on around the country. We have to leave the empowerment of grinding machines and wheelbarrows into technology. If we're going to empower 1,000 people with wheelbarrows, we can take 100 and empower them in digital technology, which now comes back to percolate down into the community. We also have to look inwards and find our strength. We can't compete with people that have found their strength in their own areas. We have to find our own strength, and then we can compete in that area and become our own giants. The public sector and the private sector leadership, yes, you're right, they're different, but more so, they're actually the same. Because we're all leaders in our own capacity. And what leadership means is we want to drive our own organization forward, which is what everybody is looking at. So in the private sector, it's easier, yes, but in the public sector, aside from the challenges, the challenges came about because of other things such as abuse that stemmed from that. You have more, resources to control in the public sector, and it is so easy to abuse the resources, and that is why we're where we are at the moment. Because for the private sector, it's actually streamlined. It's a more organized setting. In the public sector, it's actually vast. And then you need those stopgap measures to ensure that you don't, abuse the power that is in our hands. So yes, they're the same, but they're different, like I'd say. I'm not sure how to relate them perfectly, but it is more challenging in the public sector because then you deal directly with the welfare of the citizens around you. You deal directly with the welfare of people that are supposed to be benefiting. So you can't afford to not be strict about it.
So you're saying that we cannot do without the bureaucratic bottleneck?
Well, it came about because of other reasons, if you understand what I'm saying. Before, it wasn't like that before. There wasn't a procurement act up until, I think, 2004 or so. But because we needed that, we needed to stop, we make a rule, and then there are people that abuse it, and then we now make a rule to stop the abuse. So that is why we got here today, because if we had accountability and transparency and good leadership, I don't think we would be here. It would have been easier. But then we've made some mistakes, yes. But then with the youth now getting in charge, I'm sure we'll do better.
Okay. I'll throw that to you, Mr. Chidi, because you're here. You'd speak for the private sector.
Well, I think probably we'll start with accountability in the government sector. We had our chat earlier, and there's conversations about people who work in public sector not showing up to work early and things like that, for example. In the private sector, that's not really obtainable because people are more accountable, right? So basically starts with accountability and basically eliminate all the processes that create for like bottleneck or bureaucracy. You want to create a more efficient and linear system where people are actually providing value for to society. So I think public sector basically need to hold civil servants or public sector officials more accountable with the delivery of their job. They need to understand that they are providing service and then basically treat public sector like they are running a private institution, because private sector companies or institutions are known for a lean system and a more efficient system. So if we're able to run our public institutions like private businesses and hold people more accountable, I believe we're going to achieve efficiency in public sector.
Mr. Chitli, Mr. Sampson, it seems like you have an opposing view.
Well, I think that, yeah, there are some core practices and principles that are obtainable in the private sector that can be imported into the public sector to enhance efficiency and productivity. I completely agree. But if you also look at the public sector, we also need to be very careful because when you look at public sector, yes, you've got the civil service. You also have, because I look at this from a political point of view as well as a technical point of view. In the private sector, issues around inclusion or diversity management may not be an issue for you, but in the public sector, it's a fundamental issue because you've got to ensure inclusion, you've got to ensure representation. There are also fundamental human rights principles or human rights issues that also are obtainable in this discourse between both public sector and private sector. I think that where I agree is that those core principles around value, efficiency, professionalism needs to be imported into the public sector, but not wholly take the model that is obtainable in the public sector and apply in the private sector and apply in the public sector and think that it's going to cause the turnaround in the public sector. I agree, yes, there are core principles, let's employ them, but also keep in mind that when you're dealing with the public sector, is also it's quite broad, and you need to take some issues into consideration, which I have just highlighted.
Okay. Do you have a comment?
Most of what we've been discussing since yesterday and today, as I listen, it boils down more and more on our education. I believe education is the one-stop shop for all the problems that we have, is the one-stop solution to all the problems that we have. I mean, like, we spoke about a problem of our population as well. I believe education can solve that issue, as His Royal Highness Sanusi also mentioned that and pointed out yesterday. We talk about underemployment as well. Education also is a solution to that. We talk about the public sector being the bureaucracy and all that. Mr. Sampson also spoke about the inclusion, political inclusion. It still boils down to, if everybody was adequately educated, then there wouldn't be a case of one person being inadequate or not one person, someone being not competent for his role that he has to play. So I believe that one of the basic and most important agendas for this whole summit should center around educating the population, not just formal education, but also technical education as well. I would like a Nigeria where I can go to an educated mechanic to fix my car, an educated electrician to come and fix my bulbs in my house as well, just like we have in other developed countries. I believe that education will be the driving force into the future. If we're looking to shift gears, it will be harder to, we're going to lose way more with illiterate people than we will do with educated people, that's for sure. No matter how brilliant our leaders are, no matter how kind of structures we have, the bridges we build, everything that we have, it will still mean nothing if we don't have an adequately prepared and educated population. Thank you very much.
So I'd just like to add to what you said. For sure, in public sector, you need to basically account for diversity. But in accounting for diversity, I think it's also important that we're accounting for competency in diversity. So even though, yeah, it's important like we get every person to be represented, but let's get the best of our people to actually represent us, like even in the public sector.
Okay,
yeah.
I'll take Samson's comment and I'll come back to you, Chidi.
Yeah.
No, I just wanted to make a passionate appeal and just feed in on the discussion around how to get young people prepared for office, because that's what I do. I'm being part of Not Too Young to Run. The truth is, the philosophy of leadership in Nigeria today, in the public space, isn't about results and impact. It is just patronage politics. And if we don't reverse that, we cannot get the right set of young people to get into office. The second is the value is, because if you look at your state house of assemblies today, they're simply rewarding loyalty with a seat in the National Assembly or a seat in the State House of Assembly. And that's a stark reality. So if you talk about getting young people into office, if we don't reset the mindset of our political elite and fix politics like I mentioned, we're not going to get anywhere. The second point I wanted to make was the value of mentorship. Thank you, NESG, for ensuring that you have a plenary session where emerging leaders are given an opportunity to speak. Thank you. Because that is preparing and showcasing what young people are doing. Everyone here has got good things, and they are achievers. He just talked about turning around his business. And these are the kind of people we should celebrate. We don't celebrate our own. We don't tell our stories enough. And that is why we think that there are a lot of young people out there who don't have the capacity to hold public office. I beg you, invest in providing mentorship to young people, whether it's in the private sector, whether it's in the public sector, because we need to invest in building both leadership competencies in young people as well as inculcating in them the values that they need. The second and the last point is taking risks. I beg you, even if you invest in a young person and the person fails, please continue to invest in young people, because over the next 30 years, they are the ones that will be here, and the future will be determined by them. Thank you.
We only have 15 minutes to go, so I would basically drop the final question, and that is, to everybody, what will success in, say, 10 years look like to you as regards the issue of leadership in Nigeria? I'll start with Hannatu.
Success in leadership in 10 years to me would be where a people can actually ask their leader for accountability for whatever, with no fear of persecution, with no fear that there would be backlash, and with the confidence that they have to get the information that they need to know. Success would be where you can get every information you need without it being withheld from you. That's the implementation of the freedom of information. Success in leadership would be where people would actually go out with something. They know if they wake up, they've been empowered with something that they can go out and look for something for themselves, which is basically being taught how to fish. The concept of not being given the fish, but being taught how to do it, where a people can stand independently for their own selves without relying too much on their leaders, which means the leaders must have been able to pave way for their people to achieve what they want to achieve through empowerment and support and infrastructure and education and all sorts of things that need to be done. Thank you.
Samson.
Success for me over the next few years is democracy delivering development to the people. It's about reducing the level of poverty. And I want to wake up 30 years and I look at my children and be proud that they went through a public school and they have all the competencies that they deserve. Or look at our leadership, where we don't have to be debating the academic credentials of our leaders, but a leadership that understands that diversity is key to progress and growth.
Thank you. Mr. Adebo.
Well, success to me in 10 years would be to reducing the percentage of out-of-school children to about 5%. I'm really keen on seeing the nation being educated, especially the children. Because to be honest, without education, then I wouldn't be here. The emerging leaders on this high table wouldn't even be here. Almost everybody in this room, pretty much everybody in this room, including the cameramen, wouldn't be here as well. So I believe that education really goes a long way in determining our future. And also, I would like to see more inclusive governments in terms of women and youth, representing each constituency's either legislative, judiciary, or the executive arm of government. That would be nice to see. And also, I would like to see Nigeria diversify in terms of economy, rather than just relying on oil. I see Nigeria also getting just as much from agriculture as well, because there's a lot of potential there. But for some reason, it's getting less and less attractive for youth to go into agriculture. But if properly done, then it can be really rewarding. So I see, or I hope also, that the leadership also stirs the attention of the youth and also of the nation towards diversifying the economy by including agriculture in it. So just those three things will actually make me happy. Thank you.
Mr. Chidi.
Okay. I mean, success to me and to all of us would mean, obviously, many things. First off, I would like to see a Nigeria that has a unified vision to basically be the most industrialized black nation in the world. A nation that basically leads the entire African continent. Basically a united Nigeria where any individual, whether from the north, from the south, or any part of Nigeria can aspire to the highest public office without any prejudice. I would like to see a nation where our educational system can attract students from other part of the African nation or other part of the world. Mm-hmm. Basically, I would like to see success to me will also be in Nigeria when our next NESG summit in 10 years' time will have a president who's probably less than 40 years old leading us. Yeah. And finally, I think that success would be that all of the recommendation that we can have a summit where we can look back and say, for the first time, the Nigerian policymakers, who would be basically our government, actually took into considerations many of the conversations that we have had here today or that we have been having in the last 25 years. Because it's so sad, like when I got the invitation to come for this conference, the first thing I was saying to myself is probably going to be another one of the summits where we're going to come in, have conversations, and never really make any sort of like progress or any advancement in the conversations we are having. So success to me will be a few years' time we're looking back and we're sure that we had policies. For someone like me who's coming from the private sector, it's important that our policy makers can actually institute policies that can last the test of time. So I want to see the top two political parties, for example, coming together and agreeing on 10 things, such that whether we have a PDP government or an APC government, those 10 things that have been agreed on can continue, within the life cycle of the government. So whatever party you are, we know that as a nation, we have agreed to become the most industrialized black nation in the world. When you look at every thriving economy today, every thriving nation today, you find that at the heart of it, there's a successful private sector. So in China today, there are policies that are geared towards ensuring that the private sector can thrive. such that even when they have external competition coming into the country, the local industries are able to hold their own. So look at South Korea today, or Japan with the Chaebol system in South Korea, or the Karetsu and the Zaibetsu systems that happened like in Japan. We need to ensure that our leaders, our policymakers can support like local industries, private institutions in Nigeria, because only until we support private institutions, only then can we move out from poverty level to prosperity level. So that's my take, and that'll be success for me. And let me add, Nicole, I think that success will also be us as a nation being part of the G20. So because of Nigeria, in 10 years' time or in 50 years' time, they will form G21, and Nigeria should be on the G21.
Awesome, amazing. We have a few minutes to take questions from the audience, and I see a hand already raised. Can we get a mic?
Hello, good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Dr. Ayode Olatubosun-Alakeja, and it is such a delight to see a young panel. When they referred earlier to the people setting
Please, could you speak up? Sorry.
Okay, yes. I said, my name is Dr. Ayode Olatubosun-Alakeja, and it is a delight to see a young panel. And in fact, when they spoke earlier about those under 30 who were getting up on stage, I wanted to get up because I forgot that I'd passed that age. So I really feel, that's why I needed to speak. I really feel like I need to be there with you all. I have a couple of comments. First of all, Samson, it's an absolute honor to be in your presence and to see the amazing work that the Not Too Young to Run campaign did. It's wonderful. That was a great initiative. You got policy changed. You're all talking today about innovation and about what we should see in 2050. But in reality, the reason you're sitting there is because you are 2050. You are that future. And what we need to see and what we need to begin to talk about is not what we would like to see in 2050, but how are we going to get there? How are we going to disrupt? Because what it's going to take is active disruption. How are we going to innovate? How are we going to work together? How are you going to do the transgenerational change that will get us from where we are today to 2050? And in talking about that, we're going to need to start having the conversation around mentorship, because yes, our generation, the generation above us, have totally and completely screwed it up, excuse me. But we have a chance, because I also have a child who is, you know, I call Princess President, because she's 23 years old and I keep telling her that she will be the first female president of Nigeria. She looks at me like I've lost my mind. But we need to begin to aspire to that. So my question to you really is, what are the further plans for disruption? We need disruption. We're not looking for, violent disruption, but we need you guys to bring the new thing. How are we going to do that? Thank you.
Samson. He's the greatest disruptor. So.
Okay, thank you. Thanks so much for those kind comments. One of the things that we're doing at the Not Too Young to Run movement is to look backwards. And so we are beginning to mentor other young people to run for office and also building their leadership skills. And so that's one. Two is we're currently working with going to be working with about 6 universities in Nigeria to run courses or programs on public leadership and political organizing. And we're already building towards 2023 and 2027 as well. We're also working with other movements, both the women's movement and the persons with disability movements, and trying to build very strong coalitions. For the Not Too Young to Run, our focus for the 2019 elections was how do we get young people into state houses of assemblies. And we weren't bothered about other elections because the natural progression will be those who are in the state house of assemblies will transit to the national assemblies in 2023, and we're going to keep engaging with these people. So there is a broad plan that we have, but at the heart of this is also getting young professionals to be involved in politics. Politics is everything. And until you come to the center, that disruption may not take place.
Thank you, Samson. Do we have any other questions? Okay, we'll take one more, please.
Thank you very much. It's been a very, very interesting session listening to the young ones. And I just want to paint a perspective which is actually based on data about the future. The 2050 that we're talking about is estimated that you might have like about 6 billion workforce. But by that time, only 2 billion out of the 6 billion would be in employment. The remaining 4 billion would actually be economic creators themselves, self-employed and employers of labor, and a lot of MSMEs. So when we are talking a lot about education, is to ask ourselves the question, what would be the philosophy behind this education? Are we going to still be building people who are going to be going out and looking for employment? Or are we going to be very deliberate to restructure the education system in such a manner that it begins to breed entrepreneurs who are going to be doing the kind of things that Ajere is doing, Itodo is doing, Mohammed is doing, that people are not looking for jobs, but actually going out there and creating value and then becoming the job creators themselves. That's my input. Thank you.
Would anybody like to comment? Okay, Hanat.
I think, yes, like I mentioned earlier, an educational reform, which would mean that we would no longer breed students that are not inquisitive, they're not thinking out of the box, they're not stepping out of their comfort zones. We would be breeding people that even though they would take the normal courses that they do, but they can capitalize on the skills that they have acquired to go out on their own. Like he said, if you are a mechanical engineer, you can decide to have your workshop. You would not necessarily want to work for the government. If you studied woodwork or technical design, you can be your own carpenter, and then we would actually have more precise things done. Your doors wouldn't be falling off the hinges anytime soon anyway. Thank you.
Chidi?
So I think that education truly has gone beyond just like the regular education, that we know. So if we had the opportunity, for example, we should get like more of our youth to learn even simple coding, like software engineering, and basically preparing them for the future of artificial intelligence and robotics, because artificial intelligence basically is coming to take our basic job. How do we, get, people trained, and education is not just the formal education like how we know, it's basically craftsmanship like it mentioned earlier, mechanical engineering, even the work that these guys, they do to just know better.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you
very much.
We have to, okay. Sorry?
The comment to what
Somebody-
I have the
said?
microphone.
Okay.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Who is that?
Yeah, he's standing.
Okay.
Yeah. My name
Last
is
question, please, in 30 seconds. Thank you, sir.
My name is Paul Bedido. Nigeria is a very diverse nation, and we often say that diversity can be a strength. It can also be a weakness. Over the years, we have dealt with the issue of federal character. With this 2050 shifting gears, what do you as young ones would like to see? Merit to determine the future, or still federal character to continue?
Samson? I can't take more. No, we can't take any more questions because we're out of time. Samson?
And just a quick response. My generation is not waiting for 2050. We're demanding now that it should be about merit, it should be about competence.
Hanatu, 30 seconds, please.
also want to agree with Samson that we would need merit, and like he said, it needs to start now. But more so, we still have a huge population that are out of school. So we have to engage that population in school before we now decide to think of what we want to do with it, because they really have to learn to read and write for starters. So we have to engage them to be pro-education, the whole community. And then for those that have already passed that stage of education, we have to now empower them in one way or the other, because we can't leave them behind. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you so much. We're totally out of time, so I'll say in 30 seconds, if each of you can tell us, do you think we can successfully make this transition? Do you think we can hand over the baton to a more prepared younger generation to lead us to 2050? Starting with you, Chidi.
Absolutely. I think that process has already started with people like Samson, Adedoyin, Hannatu, myself, and many other young leaders today in Nigeria. I think so. I think that the youth of today understands the unity, the strength in our unity, the strength in our diversity. And like we've mentioned, the youth of today understands merit before even emotions, understands the place of both religion and tribe in our national polity and in our national leadership. And many of us are tribe blind. We're blind to tribe, or blind to religion, and we're just focused on creating and making a better nation. So yes, I think today the youths are ready.
Mr. Adebo.
Yes, most definitely. I agree with what my brother said just now. And this new generation were blind to most of what I would say the previous generation were previous to. And I use Oyo State as a context, as an example. There has to be political will in order for youth to be more included in decision-making for the future. Our governor, Governor Seyi Makinde, has also included a lot of youth in government. We have a youngest commissioner, I believe, a 27-year-old commissioner for youth and sports. We have a young speaker, well, it was done by the State House of Assembly. And also, the best example, the best legacy we can lay for other youth is also by taking our roles seriously and also outshining ourselves, as we were discussing earlier. Because we can only lead by example. We can't go around talking to youth to join politics or join in businesses, but by what we do, we inspire others.
Leading by example.
Leading by example.
Awesome, please. We'll have to move to Hannah too.
I believe we've already started handing the batons over. It's just in a short while we'll completely take over. Thank you.
Awesome. And finally, Samson.
The discourse around youth inclusion in politics isn't about fulfilling a democratic ideal. It's about reclaiming a state that has been captured by a political class that is not interested in the common good of our people.
Thank you very much, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. You've heard directly from your emerging leaders. One thing we're sure of is that the future is young and the youth need to take charge. And to have that done successfully, we need mentorship, education, and we need disruptors. That said, thank you so much for your audience. My name is Nicole Ndigwe, and I hope to see you at NES 26.
You will agree with me that this is a very demanding generation. But if what we have heard here is what 2050 will look like, then God is good. I can't see the president in the house, but I would like to proudly invite the former president, Mr. Felicia Phillips, and Mrs. Wano Adetayo to please join these young people for a group photograph. Is the chair here? I didn't see him. Please, chair. Please, still join them. I was waiting to see him on a white chair. Thank you very much. So while that is going on, let me announce very quickly. We have our design workshops immediately after the tea break, and we have the following: Reinventing Government will hold at the Oshun Room in the hotel. Trade and Export Promotion, Lagos Kogi Room. Sanctity of Contracts will be in Borno, Anambra. Business